I'd like to make an announcement. I know that many have over 140 people attend tonight's event. And among us, Tom Hong and his lovely wife, Loretta, actually among us as well. Tom is the first Asian American that elected to the San Diego City Council. I think that was in 1963, right? If I remember correctly. And he also was elected as the deputy mayor and re-elected as city council with a very high 80-something% of the votes. So Tom, thank you so much for attending today's event. As I said, you're the lily are the giants, are the pioneers of the Asian communities, right? And we appreciate all your efforts and all your struggles have done for the Asian communities. Now we opened all questions to panelists, and I have some pre-selected questions as well. I think this question I'm going to ask the Sergeant Lim. This question is from Jeff and Tracy. The Senate has passed a bill targeting anti-Asian hate crimes, and the bill has encouraged states to create a hotline for reporting the hate crimes. Is San Diego has established such a hotline for this purpose? And does the hotline speak kind of different languages and for the people that reporting the crime?
It's still early in its stages. And but the best thing is, like what Leonard said, you have multiple outlets of reporting it. The best thing to do is 911 if it's happening now, or our non-emergency number. Let's say something happens, you're shaken up, you don't know what to do, you drive home, a family member convinces you to call us, then you call our non-emergency number. Once we find out it's a hate crime, depending on what we have as in resources or officers available, we're going to try to get to it as quick as possible. When it comes to a general hotline, no, we don't have it yet. The best thing is 911 or non-emergency number, or following with the DA's office, whatever the comfort level of the community. I think a special hotline, I mean, we'll look into it. We're actually rolling out our QR codes that should be coming out probably in the next couple weeks. And it's basically 1,000 QR codes that we're going to put on businesses, places of worship, anybody that wants them. All you have to do is bring your phone, scan it, and it'll pop up with tons of resources as in where to report it. The best thing for anybody that is concerned about reporting, you know where your local police station is at. Walk down there, knock on the front door, and tell them, I want to report a hate crime. Or if you're at the comfort of your house, just call us. We'll be more than happy to actually respond and take the report.
Thank you, Lim. And this question is from the live audience. His name is Ethan Qatar. I'm sorry that I hope that I pronounced your last name correctly. And his question is, are the hate crimes against the Asian organized by any group, or are they committed by individuals only? I think this question I can direct to Leonard. Have you seen the Asian crimes more organized, or is committed by the individuals?
Yeah, so locally, not so much committed by organized groups. They do tend to be committed by individuals. But that's not to say that there aren't, white supremacist groups or white nationalist groups that will target basically anyone other than European whites. Most of those groups tend to lay most of the blame on our friends in the Jewish community, the Muslim community. Asians are much lower on their list of people that they quote unquote hate, but that's not to say that they don't. So yeah, they're invariably, with the number of hate incidents that have occurred throughout the country and throughout the state, there are some that I would have to say are committed by groups, but the majority of the ones that I've seen so far have been committed by individuals.
I think this next question I'm going to direct to Lily. The recent events have other kind of severe cases like shootings and the other crimes against the Asian Americans. There are physical attacks, but actually the institutional racism and negative stereotypes of the Asian communities has been in long existence. How to address that, the racial discrimination actually was not binary. They are not black and white. Actually, it's a multi-layer, complex issue. How do we start an honest conversation that involved all the underserved and unserved minorities?
This is a very important question, a very hard question. I think we have to start first from education, starting from very young. Babies don't discriminate. Babies do not. Young people love to play with young people. They don't discriminate. They hear, they observe, then they learn. So we have to do a lot in our education system from very early on to first understand our equity, our equality, our inclusion, and most importantly, our differences and diversity. They should be part of our social fabric. So that's the education part. So if you listen to your parents when they talk about another group of people, do they talk about them negatively or positively? So even adults, even among our, I would say, our AAPI communities, I want you to look at yourself and be very honest and say, do I have any implicit racist ideas about any group? Do I have problems with people of disability? Mr. Lau, Kenneth Lau, was working in Oakland, California. His child was in a school without understanding what was going on in the school. So in 1974, Lau versus Nichols established a Supreme Court case whereby bilingualism, bilingual education is to be offered. So we must educate, even though we have linguistic and cultural diversity, we must educate all people in that area. So I think we have to start from the very young, and we have to start from ourselves. And if we are among social groups, social circles, we ask each other, do we honestly say to ourselves and others that we treat all races equally? We treat all people equally. Everyone should have the civil rights and the human rights to be treated like that. But we must start from ourselves. Family education, public education, public forum like this today, Sunny, is a great way to start. We do not put the blames just on others. We have to look at ourselves from inward as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Lily. I do think that's very important, and we know that this is, racial issues is not really that simple and multi-layered. And we do have a question from our audience from Will Fraser. He's asking, what do you think that the API community should do to show public support for the Black Lives Matter movement? Kent, you like to take on this question?
Yeah, certainly. I think that to follow up with what Dr. Lily Chang said, I mean that was such a powerful statement, because truly I do think that a lot of responsibility lies in all of us, because only we as a community can work together to combat hatred and racism. But we can't just do it because it's impacting us at the moment, Asian Americans in particular, even though we know we have a very long history of it. I think that's where the education and the awareness is so important. I can't express how many times that presentation that I shared earlier, when given in other groups, no matter how educated people feel like they are about history, are shocked to find some details about our past. I mean, so many community members still don't realize that the Chinese Exclusion Act ever even happened, as a good example. So I think that kind of history is critical to people's understanding and awareness. But when it comes to showing up for other communities, I think it's critical for us to consider that what is happening to us now is not is part of a pattern of history that we have seen in other communities. And if we are hopeful that others will stand up with us in solidarity with us in these kinds of moments, I think we also have to ask ourselves how we can do the same for them. So I know last year during, even during a lot of what we were seeing around Asian American racism during the pandemic, following what we know now as the murder of George Floyd, there were a lot of Asian Americans that actually came out and asked, what can we do to show support for the Black community, to show that we understand what they're going through, so that there can be an opportunity to work together. And in return, I think what we have seen very uniquely during the beginning of this year, when there were several rallies and marches and causes, that we saw a lot of members of different communities coming out to stand in support of the Asian American community as well. And I think the work that we have to do is to continue sort of fostering that together. And I think by doing that, we have a stronger opportunity to speak out against, any incidents. If I can add, Sunny, one last thing to where I think Leonard was answering earlier about, cases from individuals and groups. Maybe one other thing I will note is that, because so many cases tend to be underreported, I think sometimes it's very hard to tell. A lot of them very much are individuals who, I think to Lily's point, many times we have individuals who will say comments that are not hate crimes, but they are certainly hateful. And sometimes they come from people who don't even recognize it, right? And I think those incidents are just as important for us to stand up against as the ones that do rise to the level of being a hate crime. So.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you. That's a very good insight. I do remember there a study asking in the modern times which minority are discriminated against the most. And I think that nobody kind of answered it's the Asian Americans, but actually it was what the Japanese Americans was sent into the internment camp during the World War II. So, but nobody kind of recognized actually the Asian Americans that has a history was discriminated against. So I think that it's important for us to educate, and also that collaborating with other minorities and stands in solidarity with them and broaden our base. So it's very important. I think the next this question is very practical question from one of our audience. His name is Will Wang. What's the appropriate and legal response to a perceived threat in public if it's racially motivated? For example, someone starting following me with racial slurs. Leonard or Lim, would you like to answer this question? It's very practical. If you were falling by somebody throwing racial slur at you, what'd you do?
I'll take it. If somebody's following you, the best thing to do is don't get in a confrontation with them. You don't know what they're armed with or anything like that. They might have weapons. You don't know what their intention is. If you're in a public place, depending on what time of day it is, go into an open business, a restaurant, an office, and basically say, hey, somebody call 911 for me. This guy's been following me. And at least, for example, you call 911 and the call doesn't go through and you hang up for some reason, dispatch will call you back because we already have the number. Like I said, the goal is to separate. You don't ever want to actually engage somebody. Now, if it comes to a point where you have no other options, you're pinned, you are in an area where you just can't get out or anything like that, then you got to do what you have to do. And that depends on your personal level of comfort. But to me, the goal is never to engage. You need to separate, because if you separate, then nobody's going to be hurt.
Thank you, Lam. Yeah, do not engage, but look for help if the situation like that have happened, and report. I have a question from Simon Su. This question I'm going to direct to Leonard. Has the rate of Asian hate crime in San Diego gone up since 2019? Which area, district do they mostly occur? And what are the reasons for these hate crimes?
Yeah, so I can only comment on on the case that's been closed, I can't really comment on cases that are still pending, but the one that's been resolved now occurred downtown San Diego. I will say that generally speaking, because I review not only hate crimes, but hate incidents that are reported directly to our hotline. So I can openly comment about those because they're not ongoing investigations. A lot of them have been related to fears or myths about COVID-19. You know, and what the mayor was saying earlier about the rhetoric and the language that's been used to characterize the virus, it's had an effect. And you can't say, you know, all of these hate incidents that have occurred within the last year, the pretty dramatic rise, and then now what we're seeing, the hate crimes, that the way that we characterize that the virus and the way that we drummed up the fear regarding where it started and who's responsible for it, if anyone is responsible for it, I think that's had a huge impact on what we've seen the last year. So not surprisingly, a lot of the hate incidents that have been reported have been comments like, you know, go back to China, or you brought the China virus here. And so those things I can pretty much safely say, no, it's attributable to the pandemic and everything that's been caused by it.
I have a question actually from Jeff and Tracy. They asked it relate to this hotline issue. I said there is actually have many unreported case against the senior citizens, especially the people that have language barriers. Is there any kind of special help for those senior citizens who have language barrier to report such kind of harassment and crimes?
I'll take that. We basically, when you call the hotline, it's going to be in English, but then when you pick out, all you have to say is whatever language you need to speak, and you will get we go to the language line, and then we basically, it's almost like a three-way or sometimes even a four-way call. And the reason what I mean by a four-way call is you have the victim, you have the dispatch, you have the lead dispatch, and you have a translator, and they can all be commenting at once and then giving live updates to the officers that are actually responding. So like I said, we have access, and this is a 24/7 service where we would access a person that speaks that specific language. We just need to know, you know, sometimes, you know, the dispatchers, they're trained at what they're doing. They'll slow down the person and they'll try to calm them down, even if it's, you know, and they'll say, what language are you speaking? And then they'll patch somebody that speaks that different language. So I know that we feel that they won't understand us. No, we have that capability. We do have that capability.
Okay, thank you, Lem. Actually, that's very, you know, good information. And the 911 actually have people can speak your language, so don't afraid to report such a crime. I think it's so important to educate our community that don't be afraid, don't be scared to report the crimes and to report that's gonna harassment. So at least we can get information data of this kind of thing, so we can better address this issue. The next question, I think it's I'll direct to Lily or Ken. Maybe you can help answer this question. So no Asian American histories that have mentioned the contribution the Asian American. I'm sorry, that no Asian American histories and the contribution of Asian Americans are mentioned in our school textbooks covering American civilizations. As a matter of fact, the Asian Americans has been a big part of the American civilization, from building continental railroads to advancing science and technologies, especially the contribution in fighting COVID-19 the past year. How can we more get involved to filling this missing history? How can we engage the news media and the entertainment industry, have more honest dialogue and have the more cover of the outstanding contributions by the Asian Americans? Lily.
Yeah. First, I want to say something just so that Lem and I talk often about this. So if the person who has been victimized, who wants to report a crime or something that has happened to him or his family, when he calls the 911, he or she needs to know that you can say the word Vietnamese, Chinese, Lao, just make that sound. The dispatcher will hear it and will do his or her best to get the language, because language is power. We must be able to get to somebody who knows that my mother was pushed down on the corner of the street near 99 Ranch Market, something like that. Okay, just know that you should report. You definitely should. Now, regarding the issue or issues about uh, contributions from the AAPI community or individuals for the hundreds of years, a few hundred years in this country, the United States of America. If those stories have not been told, Kent told a few stories, but they are hundreds of them. We need to create a space for the stories to be told beyond just the Asian Pacific movements and films and PBS. So it is very important in the education and the empowering part to understand that we also need to get to know the newspapers, journalists, TV stations, local people, so they can help to share our platform. So we have to be out there. Our stories have to be told. Yes, there are many, many scientists who have made great contributions in the areas of disease prevention, in the building of vaccines for combat different kinds of viruses, also in the IT area, and so on. But our stories must be shared and told, and we must learn to become savvy regarding working with people in the journalistic world, not the specific ethnic language journals, because they are written in Tagalog or Chinese or Vietnamese. We would need to get to the mainstream media. They need to know our interesting stories and our contributions, which are solid. But we have to make ourselves known to the others. Yeah.
Thank you,
It
Ken.
will,
As the Asian art movement, so how do we combine the art forms with these messages and, can reach out more community, reach out more audience about our values of our voice?
Yeah, I think so much of history is always told by the ones who write the books, and I think when we look back at our history, what we recognize is that there are many dark moments in American history that tend to not be covered. I mean, we know that the gold rush happened, but of course, history books don't mention that Chinese American laborers literally built the railroads, or they don't mention that Filipino farm laborers were often exploited in the early 1900s to fuel our farm movement, and in fact are critical members of what caused the sort of the farm labor movement in the 1960s. And so a lot is really just about who chooses to tell history. And I think we are at a critical time where we have the opportunity to go back and actually look at that and to see what's missing. Many of the things I talked about earlier were not things that I learned in high school or even college. I think that shows how much we have to do to share. Some of the work Pacific Arts Movement does is to share Asian American, Pacific Islander stories through film, and we have found that to be a very powerful component in terms of showcasing what others might perceive to be different, and in doing so, hoping that we can inspire people to be more understanding and compassionate. So I think a key to all of this is asking ourselves who tells these stories, who writes the books. And maybe one great example to this is the API Coalition has formed a youth task force led by some members of the Korean American Coalition, with Ron Cho here from APAPA. Eddie Park has been assisting, he's the principal at Adobe Bluffs Elementary School, to begin talking about how do we engage our local school districts to see what content is being shared with students, and how can we help advise and be a voice. And I think that's where it starts. Maria Gloria talked about how so much of representation means getting people to the table to start. And I think that's something we all can help with.
Yeah. Thank you, Ken. And our time is it's at 8:31, so that's about to conclude our the virtual rally. And I think it's very important for us to all to know that every one of us is part of the history and tell your stories because your story matters and you matter. So thanks for all the panelists. Thanks for Mayor Gloria. Thanks for Leonard. Thanks for Kent. Thanks for Lily. Thanks for Lim. Thank all our panelists. I'm sure that our dialogues will continue and for the years and for the decades to come. Thank you all. And thank you all attendees attending our tonight's event. Thank you and good night.